challenge here. What I'm going to talk about is this notion of technology, public policy, smart cities, and I'm calling this Notes from the Frontier. Some technologies that perhaps you haven't heard about, or you have heard about, wondering what it is. And in the next 20 minutes or so, I'll try to give you like a bird's eye view of how it fits together. But before doing that, I wanted to just look at what are the problems facing cities today, because I went into research on this. I found there was this wonderful article, 10 city challenges, the top 10 challenges facing cities today: health and substance abuse, changing demographics, lack of affordable housing, infrastructure management, environmental degradation, energy use, carbon footprint, resilience to climate change. So these are the mayors of major cities kind of came up with these problems today. And if you look at these problems, you'll find that some of them can be solved by smartness, the ones in red, and others cannot. So smart cities are not going to solve health and substance abuse in any reasonable way, or the changing demographics, right? But the ones in red, the infrastructure management, environmental degradation, energy use, and resilience to climate change are the ones that we can hopefully tackle by collecting data and analyzing them. So for the rest of this talk, I'm only going to look at the ones in red and acknowledging that we cannot actually solve everything. There's still going to be problems even if we had the smartest city in the world. Okay. So digging down into these, infrastructure management or mismanagement comes down to transportation, so infrastructure, water, stormwater and sewage, waste management, leaf and snow clearance, tree cover, and parking, right? Where did I get this list from? From the City of Waterloo's website, actually. If you look at all the services provided by the City of Waterloo, these are the services. It's not the least bit sexy, right? It's plumbing, it's plumbing, it's water, literally it's plumbing, but it's important. And so, my background is computer networking. I'm a plumber by trade. And so this is really interesting to me, but very, very few people care about it. And I'm impressed that so many people showed up because it's all plumbing. It's all stuff under the ground that nobody cares about until it breaks, all right? Okay, so, and so there's energy use and carbon footprint, resilience I talked about earlier. So at a high level, what you're talking about is moving stuff. All of these things have to be moving energy, or people, or water, or waste, right? So, and the second thing you're doing is we are spending. You're spending money, you're spending energy, you're spending carbon footprint. And we want to do it with and your susceptibility to shocks. So if I just remind you of what I did earlier, so these things, the top transportation, water, stormwater, waste, snow, this is all moving stuff, basically. And energy use has to do with spending money, spending energy, spending carbon, and doing it with shocks, right? So when you think about this as energy and cost, and for moving stuff, you kind of start thinking about what if you can think of the city as an organism, as that, something that like a person or an animal that eats food, excretes, walks around, spends energy. What about that? Could we do that and could study the movement of energy, materials, peoples, and waste as an organism would? And wonderfully, I had this idea and I looked it up, and sure enough, in 1965, the year I was born, a person called Abel Woolman wrote an article in Scientific American, and it's actually really worth reading. He says the metabolic requirements of a city can be defined as all the materials and commodities needed to sustain the city's inhabitants at home, at work, and at play. And it includes the construction materials needed to build the city itself, and the metabolic cycle is not completed until the waste and residues of daily life have been removed and disposed of. Abel Woolman was actually responsible for the water treatment facilities in Baltimore, and he built such a wonderful system that it was copied all across the United States and across the world because it was the first properly thought out clean water delivery system and the sewage system in the world. So he knew what he's talking about, but this idea has caught on, and now there's a whole field called urban metabolism. And it looks like something like this. This is one of the early diagrams. Of course, I'm not going to explain it, but this has to do with the ecosystem in Brussels. This was done in 1977, and it shows all the stuff that's moving in and out. There's carbon moving in and out, there's energy moving in and out, there's water coming in, waste moving out, and all of it has been quantified. All of it has been quantified. You know how many megatons of carbon, sodium, sulfur dioxide, and so on has been coming through. And this gives us now like a picture of what it looks like to move people, move water, move sewage. It looks like this. A different way of doing it is called the Sankey diagram, and this is a Sankey diagram I'm showing you for energy use in the United States in 2017. And it shows on the left the different sources: solar, nuclear, hydro, wind, and on the right you can see what it's used for. The pink stuff, residential, commercial, industrial, transportation, and then the gray stuff on the right is basically rejected energy. Waste energy is about 66%. 2/3 of all the energy that's spent is wasted. That's what it's saying. And of the remaining 1/3, it's going into residential, commercial, and so on. And in between, you see, all the different use cases for natural gas, goes different places, and so on and so forth. The details aren't important. What is important is to realize that it's possible for us by using sensors, measurements, and so on to create a snapshot, a sort of a dashboard for the health of an ecosystem. And here's one for Canadians, actually this is for Quebec. Similar kind of thing, so it's in French, but you can see on the left you have hydro, biomass, gas, petrol. On the right, same thing, residential, industrial, transportation, and so on, and the wasted and the used thing. So this has been done for Quebec. I couldn't find one for Ontario, and I certainly couldn't find one for Kitchener-Waterloo, right? But Quebec has done it. So what if we had it? We could start thinking about, why are we wasting so much energy? Why is it that 71% or whatever it is of the energy in Quebec is wasted? What is 712 terajoules of energy is wasted overall. It has to do with conversion efficiencies. It has to do with different kinds of things. But if you don't know what you're doing, how can we fix it? Right? All right, so another example, this is from Toronto. This is done by people at the University of Toronto. It's called the metabolism of neighborhoods, and it's showing one neighborhood. It's the Trinity neighborhood in Toronto, and it's showing on the left over here all of the energy coming in. So it's solar, heat, water, and then food and beverages, tap water, transportation, fuel. This is all the inputs, and then you have meals, apartments, transportation, and then what's going out? Human waste, liquid food waste, solid food waste, respiration, transpiration. So again, you see how the neighborhood is being treated like an individual. And we could do this too. So where is this related to smart cities? It has to do with the need for data. I talked about in the beginning the problems facing cities. If you want to solve these problems, we need to understand how to collect the data and how to analyze it, how to infer from it, and this is an example of how we can make inferences. Okay, so there is a problem though. So again, so the problem is that we need this, we need to understand how these patterns are organized into flows of energy, materials, and people, but we need data. And the biggest problem facing researchers today, and this is just quotes from various papers that I pulled out, I can say the biggest challenge of the study was to find reliable data. This is the material flow analysis. It will be necessary for government to improve data production. Okay, so everyone has the same problem. There's not enough data, right? So this is slowly changing. For example, this is the Open Data Initiative from the city of Waterloo. They have 87 different data sets available. You can find out exactly where all the streets are, where all the fire hydrants are, which streets are given priority when you're clearing snow, all sorts of great stuff, but not the data you need to create the urban metabolism, to figure out these energy inputs and energy outputs and things like that that are critical for us to create the analysis that we need. So so the two big ideas are we can treat cities as organisms and use urban metabolism insight into how it works and fix some problems. And the second thing is we need data. So now I'm going to talk about where things are changing. So the first thing that's changing is we are able to collect more data using this Internet of Things, which allows pervasive measurement, communication, monitoring, and control. So this is basically what I do, right? So I'm a researcher, not in public policy, but in computer science. So I build stuff, or my students really build stuff. I tell them what to do, but they do the work for pervasive. So there's sensors today that are so small you can hardly believe. This is a 1 millimeter by 2 millimeter temperature sensor. You can see how small it is. I mean, that's the thumbprint of somebody, right? So we can put these really, really tiny sensors on things. We can communicate everywhere. I mean, you all have mobile phones. You know what that looks like. And that graphic means nothing. It just looks pretty. We have pervasive control. So that's a microcontroller. That thing over there, again, sitting on somebody's thumb, is a microcontroller. That's what computers look like these days. That's how small they get, right? And this thing over here is what's called an Onion Omega. It's a small IoT device. It's actually manufactured in Toronto. It is designed in Toronto, probably manufactured in China. But it's about this big, and it's a Linux computer. It costs $5, right? And that's your Nest thermostat. So we've got control everywhere. And this is what a smart city would look like. This is a vision from the European Technology Platform vision. Basically, everybody's talking to everything, everywhere, using IoT. And so you have also renewable energy devices. You have satellite communication. You have electric cars, solar panels. So your energy sources are renewable. Everything is nice and clean and beautiful. But it's also this. Traffic light cameras, CCTVs, identification of license plates, and face identification. So the previous, Andy already talked about facial identification. There's 200 million plus cameras in China, and they're all capable of doing this, okay? So yeah, it's nice to collect data, but what about this, right? What about the fact that everything you do in public can be tracked? And if your sensors are so small and so tiny, there could be a camera hidden inside the mic for all I knew. You can see the inside of my mouth. You know, it's not particularly pleasant, but the fact is that these networked cameras are really microscopic these days, okay? And so we do have the possibility of essentially great surveillance. So the second thing we can do, and I'm going to come back to the surveillance aspect in just 2 minutes, but the second thing we can do with the data is we can actually analyze it, and there's this big term that's floating around called data science. I really don't know too much about it, but I found this beautiful graphic, so I'll show you what it is. It talks about the different aspects of data science, visualization, statistical modeling, computing, data technology, data research, consulting. It's basically taking masses and masses of data and getting insights out of it by doing something which is different from before. And what is that difference? I'll tell you what it is. In the past, we had a model for reality, right? We would have the model, and then we would collect the data and we would validate the model. So I have a theory of gravitation, I collect data, sure, yeah, it makes it, matches. With big data, what happens is we collect all the data and then we create the model based on what the data is telling us. We don't have a model. We figure out the model sort of post hoc. So we just collect all the data we can and we throw it into this big data-based thing, this machine, this mixer, and you blend it, and then something pops out and say, it makes sense. I don't know why, but it makes sense. It can predict stuff and it works properly. Nobody can tell you why it works, but it does. What is it being used for? Mostly to basically create addicted consumers. That's the bottom line. So that's what Amazon uses to make sure that when you click on something, it says, oh, and people also bought this other stuff. It's what YouTube uses to say, if you watch this video, oh, here's another video that you might like. So it's as one of my colleagues in computer science said, it's tragedy that the smartest minds of our generation are being used to addict people to technology. And that's basically what it is. But it can be used for good purposes as well, which is to create this city as a metabolic entity and to analyze the data to come up with inherent models that we don't actually know, but we can determine from the data what it is. So even though, in my opinion, much of data science today has been abused, it is not a bad technology. It can be used for good purpose, and that's what we'd like to use it for. Here's another technology that has been used mostly for bad purposes, but can be used for good purpose as well, which is blockchain. So many of you probably heard of blockchains or Bitcoin, things like that. And when I first heard of blockchain and Bitcoin, I said, oh, that's creepy stuff. It's basically used to extort people or buy guns and drugs, which is true. However, there is another part to it. I want to explain what it is, and it'll take me a couple of minutes. So hopefully when you leave today, at least you knew one thing, which is what are blockchains anyway in the first place. So this is what it is. It's a globally visible ledger that is owned by no one, but can be trusted by everyone. right? So nobody owns it, but everybody can trust it, which is kind of cool. And everybody can see it. And again, you can right away see why it's useful in the context of data collection. If you know what data is being collected, then you can see that you can trust the data, but you don't need to trust the people collecting the data. So I'll show you in a minute how that works. But where did it start from? It started from buying a hot dog, right? So if you go to a hot dog vendor, you want to buy a hot dog, what you do is first you go to the bank, you get $5. The bank reduces your balance by $5. You pay the hot dog vendor $5, get your hot dog, and the hot dog vendor deposits the money in the bank, and their account goes up by $5, right? So the $5 is just a way to transiently move money between ledgers. So it's all about manipulating a ledger, right? So if you can just transfer money from one ledger to another, why bother with cash? And that's exactly what your Interact card is all about. Why do you need cash when you can just transfer money from one ledger to another? But the problem is we may not trust the bank, right? What happens if you don't trust the bank? So if the ledger is corrupted, how do you know? So the bank transfers instead of $5, $5,000 from your account to the hot dog vendor because they made a mistake. What are you going to do about it? They can say, well, we transferred it. You have no proof. You have no proof that it was incorrect. And so what we want to do is to worry about this. And so basically, computer science comes to the rescue here by distributing the ledger. So the bank not just has one ledger, but it has 200 copies of ledger that everybody has. And if the bank makes a mistake, everybody else can say, hey, you made a mistake. You shouldn't have transferred 5,000. It's only $5. What did you do that for? And so you get basically governance. You get the ability for people to vet other people's decisions and say, your ledger is not okay because we don't think it makes any sense. That is something you don't have today. If there's an Interact transfer that is got the zeros off, so it's a 50.00, it's 5,000.00, there's no way to fix that. So blockchains can fix that. The second thing is it's transparent to validate. Anybody can validate transactions. What does it mean to validate a transaction? So here's a Sudoku puzzle, right? It's very hard to solve. But how easy is it to verify? It's really easy to verify. You just added the columns here. There's only numbers from 1 to 9 have been used only once in each row and each column and each square. It takes a second to verify it, but it takes many hours to solve it. So these are what are called one-way functions. They're easy to verify, hard to solve. And by doing this, it's possible for us to create these immutable, transparent ledgers where you can't change them because to change them will require you to do a lot of work. And it's easy to verify it hasn't been changed. So that's sort of a high-level view of how we get immutability or transparency. And then once it's, as I said, once it's in the ledger, we use the same kind of trick, the Sudoku trick, to make sure it can't be modified again. And it's secure because once it's there, you can't repudiate. You can't say, no, it didn't happen. It's there forever. And even if a certain fraction of servers get hacked or become untrusted. Okay, so this way we can get trust without having a central trusted entity, because with these innovations we get distribution, we get transparency, we get immutability and security. So to go back to this example of the Scotia Bank or whatever bank that's doing the transfer, if you do the transfer and you have a ledger, a globally visible ledger that nobody owns but everybody can trust, then we do that by making lots of copies and making sure that to change anything requires a lot of work. And you can prove that nobody's changed it because they just don't have enough computing capacity to change the ledger. So we get the trust out of it. And that's basically the origin of Bitcoin. So that is what I said earlier. So how can we use this, right? So we earlier heard about the problem of CCTV cameras, of public data. What we really should be doing, in my opinion, is to use blockchains for consent for data use, right? And I want to just unpack that for a moment. Let us say that there's a company which wants to use CCTV data, and what we need to do is that we need to make sure that the users who are affected or their delegates, which could be the municipal government or local government or somebody, has given them the right to access the data, and that consent is what's stored in the blockchain. So when you ask for the data, the person holding the data is going to say, give me the proof. Give me the proof that it's okay for you to have this data. And if you can't prove it in a way that is immutable or transparent, all those things, you can't have it, right? And if you do this, I believe that it fills this privacy gap that we've heard about in the previous talk. More specifically, it means that when consent is granted or when consent is required in order to access data, that proof has got to be vetted by multiple entities. So the local government will say, yes, it's okay, and the provincial government says, yes, it's okay, maybe an NGO said it's okay. And we do all these together, and that's how we get this. So to sum up, I believe that cities are metabolic creatures. It's a nice metaphor, and it really does work. To manage them, we need to understand the flow of energy, materials, and people. This will allow us to solve some, but not all the problems. Solve some important problems, though. So far, we've had a lack of data and analytical capabilities, so it's not a lack of trying, but we just don't have access to many of the data that we need. And this is going to change with IoT and data science, but there is a danger. And I believe that when you use blockchains for consent management for data, it's going to protect the privacy. So with that, I'll end. I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.